You're listening to Conversations with Shonda, a podcast that unpacks the community's grittiest, most vexing problems, hosted by Shonda Smith Baker.
This podcast and event series is sponsored by the Greater Twin Cities, Minnesota chapter of the Links Incorporated. The Links Incorporated is an international, not-for-profit corporation established in 1946. It is one of the nation's oldest and largest volunteer service organizations committed to enriching, sustaining, and enduring the culture and economic survival of African Americans and other people of African ancestry. Nevada Littlewolf, I'm so glad to have you on Conversations with Shonda. Thank you so much for agreeing to be a guest.
I am very happy to be here, Shonda.
Good. What a time we are in. And, I know that this will come out later, but we are sitting on a Tuesday, a day that will have the first and perhaps only presidential debate. And I am actually anticipating it. I'm normally, sort of hit or miss in terms of the debate. But I'm very interested in seeing how the issues show up. So I don't know if you're anticipating this evening or not, but, how are you feeling going into it?
I've been waiting for this debate since 2019, honestly. And when Kamala Harris was running for president during that time, and she was on the debate stage with the other party, DFL, our Democratic candidates, she just did a fantastic job. And now is the opportunity for her to debate her opponent. And I think that's going to just be really wonderful to see tonight.
Nevada, you have long been part of campaigns and really been engaged in electoral politics. And there are a lot of people that are just getting sort of involved and interested. What sort of advice would you offer? Because, presidential debates, they can, they're just little quips, right? They're just little pieces of what someone's agenda will actually be. So how should you take in the information that you hear during those debates? What should we be listening for?
Yeah, I think what will be really important is to listen around policy solutions. And of course, there will be quips and people will be paying attention to those as well. But I do think what's most important is to think about where people are really bringing in substance to the conversation. And then how do those policy solutions impact your own lived experience?
That's helpful to know because there are some issues, and I know you are the executive director at Women Winning, and you work to elect pro-choice women into elected roles. I am no longer a birthing woman. I am done with that stage of my life, although reproductive justice is still very important to me for other women, other families, and certainly generations that come behind me to have those options. And so the way that you frame that are issues that are of importance to oneself. But how would you describe issues that are just important to those that are sort of around us that may not be immediate to us, but might be of importance to the communities that we are associated with?
I would say, at Women Winning, we're really thinking about the fight for reproductive rights within a reproductive justice framework, which that means that we're really thinking about birthing people's ability to make the decision to have children or to not have children. And if and when they choose to have children, that they can raise their children in safe and healthy environments and communities. And so while we are very, very much interested in hearing from the debate stage tonight, where people stand on reproductive rights, access to abortion, healthcare, and where people's bodily autonomy will be protected. I think that, folks, all people, I will just say all people, birthing people, of course, but all people have a stake in what's going on related to reproductive rights being taken away, because all people have reproductive organs unless you've had a surgery. And I think that we need to expand the conversation beyond just this sort of binary of choice, anti-choice, into understanding like the bigger and broader issue around reproductive justice and what that means for communities across the country. I mean, we know that rural communities have less access to resources. We know that Black and Brown communities are disproportionately impacted by maternal mortality, amongst other disparities related to birthing. And more, as this conversation has evolved since the Dobbs decision and when Roe fell, I think this conversation has broadened out where people are really understanding the real impact of the policy decisions.
We also have sort of narrowed this debate down to women, where it does impact men and other families that have not been sort of traditionally identified. And our governor, now the vice presidential candidate, has brought that into public debate when he has shared him and First Lady Gwen's sort of journey to their daughter, Hope. And I thought that the conversation, at least I've seen on social media, was really exciting to me to see the conversation expand and see men being brought into that conversation along the journey of bringing families into their lives.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we are doing more around this conversation as well at Women Winning. We actually have an event coming up in October called Men and Allies, which is really highlighting the men who either work with pro-choice women who are elected to office or who are standing beside them. And so we have Mayor Melvin Carter, who will be there, who is, as we all know, the mayor of St. Paul, which has a 100% all pro-choice woman city council, the first of its kind in the nation. And Mayor Carter works with that council. And I think it's going to be really interesting to hear what he has to say about what that means, because it's a first of its time ever, right? And we also will have John Bessler, who is husband to Senator Klobuchar, and we'll also have Tom Weber, who is the second gentleman of Minnesota, husband to Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. And so I think it is really important that we center these conversations, then help to center those conversations for folks to understand that we are all in this together. And as much as I think people may want to frame this as a women's issue, quote unquote women's issue, it's really a people's issue. And we want to start sharing those stories more broadly about how all people are impacted by the issue of bodily autonomy.
You brought up our Lieutenant Governor, Peggy Flanagan. I think what is significant about this election are many, many things in terms of representation and the opportunity perhaps for us to have the first woman president of the United States. But in Minnesota, it could also mean that we would have the first woman governor who is a Native woman. What does that mean for you and for us and perhaps the excitement that you're seeing generated around that possibility?
Yeah, I mean, I will take everything sort of with a grain of salt, and I'm sure Lieutenant Governor Flanagan would echo this, is that it's kind of, we have to take one step at a time, and we first have to make sure we are sending Tim Walz to the White House as the vice president. And there is a lot of work to do between now and Election Day. So I say that because I live in reality that we have to do the work to get there. And I mean, I have been friends with Lieutenant Governor Flanagan for a very long time. I will say that she is somebody that I have worked beside for possibly decades in the work in Minnesota to bring Indigenous people, organizers of color, people of color into the political fold. And that work didn't just happen overnight. It took a long time. I'm incredibly proud of her as an Anishinaabe, as an Ojibwe woman, to hold that seat, because I actually know how much work it took for her to get into that position. And that representation does matter. It matters for the state of Minnesota that is home to 11 tribal nations. And it matters to all of the other citizens who are a part of the state. To have an Indigenous person in a leadership position is actually going to just make, I think, our state stronger. And certainly in the United States of America, it will be the first time that we see in a Native woman in leadership. And I mean, you already said this, but like the first time for Minnesota to have a woman governor in itself is a really, really big deal. So yes, I mean, I'm incredibly excited about it. I think that our future is bright, but I'm also a realist in that I know, I mean, having worked on campaigns just about my entire life, like I know that we have to put the work in and we have to make sure that we're not taking anything for granted and that we are earning those votes and earning that support.
Yeah, fair point. Really, this conversation is just really about, what might happen on either side of this, right? If Lieutenant Governor moves into the governor's seat, it means Bobby Joe Champion then moves into the Lieutenant Governor seat, which means he will be the first African American person as a Lieutenant Governor. And so there are some interesting possibilities of how things will shift depending on the outcome of this election. So down that line, and you sort of touched on it, but how do you define the role of representation in a healthy democracy? And what impact does inclusive representation have on policymaking?
Well, I mean, I always go back to the quote about like, if you're, it's two wolves and a sheep, like sitting down to make a decision about what they're having for dinner. I mean, you can understand what's going to be on the table. And I know that we also have lots of studies that show that when you bring diverse perspectives into decision-making processes, you actually come out with better results. And I think that we have in Minnesota, for a long time, I would say have had a pretty singular sort of voice at the table that has been making decisions about our state. And I think the voices that have historically been left out have been Indigenous voices, Black voices, immigrant voices, other communities of color that call Minnesota their home. And in the last decade, I think there's been more of a shift to seeing more diverse communities or diverse individuals running for public office and winning their elections. And I think that's been actually a really healthy thing for Minnesota and something that I think has resulted in very strong policy because we're thinking about the future of the state because we also know that demographically the state is shifting and changing, and in the future it's going to look much different than it does right now. So in order to meet, not just meet this moment, but also be ready for the future, I think we absolutely need to have voices from communities at the table to help us make sure that we are making really good decisions and not kind of just making assumptions that, oh, this is what we think that community needs. This is what we think that community needs, without actually talking to the community or having a representation from different communities.
Yeah. Can you say what women winning is and perhaps the impact that it has had over its years of service to the state?
Yeah, absolutely. So Women Winning is a nonpartisan C4 nonprofit organization, and we operate two PACs, a state PAC and a federal PAC. So we do endorsements across the state of Minnesota from anywhere from school board, city council, county commission, and state house and state senate. That's our state PAC. We also, with our federal PAC, do federal endorsements for any federal offices. So, for instance, this year, in 2020, we were able to endorse Kamala Harris for vice president. And this year, we were able to endorse Kamala Harris for president, which is a great thing for us, like that we're moving in the direction of like getting higher up the ballot. We're really proud to also endorse two women senators, pro-choice women senators, of course, pro-choice congresswomen as well. So we do the endorsements, but we also, our work is really to recruit, train, support before we even get to like endorsing and electing. We're doing that work to sort of cultivate pro-choice women and get them engaged in the political process and leading a political life so that we can move them towards running for office and then seeking our endorsement and helping pro-choice women get elected. We've been operating in Minnesota since 1982, so over 42 years now. We are one of the oldest women's organizations in Minnesota, certainly the longest standing women's political organization in Minnesota. This organization was founded as a nonpartisan organization by women from various and multiple political party backgrounds. And we have over the years endorsed women from multiple political party backgrounds. And that actually is a very high value for us, that we are nonpartisan and that we are more issue focused on ensuring that we are working to elect women who protect reproductive rights and bodily autonomy. And so that is what we look for most of all, is that we have the right champions that will be able to lead in elected office around our issue. And I will say, over time, I can think about, we do a luncheon every year, and we have a thing called the candidate procession. And, when we first started the luncheons and doing this procession, it was really just a handful of women who were kind of marching down the aisle, that were like, we're running for office and we're doing this. To like this year, we had a record number, the highest number ever of women who were either elected or endorsed by us, close to 100 women walking down that aisle together. We kind of joked about it because we had to work with our event planner to make sure we had railings on the stage so nobody would fall off the stage this year. So, I think that we've come a long way, and I think that we still have a long way to go.
As you know, I have attended that luncheon many times over the years. That procession is one of the highlights, to be able to visually see the women that come down. I mean, the energy in the room, the standing ovation, the cheers, the appreciation for the work that we know that the candidates have and the electeds have and the work that they've put in. And to the point that you made, and this is not just a Democratic or Republican sort of contingency of women that come down that aisle. The connecting point of these women are that they are women that believe in reproductive justice. Did I get that correct?
That's correct. I think we screen based on, do you support access to legal, safe abortion healthcare? And do you believe in the principles of reproductive justice, which are birthing people's ability to make the decision to have children or not have children, and then, of course, raise their children in safe and healthy communities and environments. So we'll also say that, I served on the Virginia-Minnesota City Council for 10 years, and that is a local office. I was endorsed by Women Winning all 3 times that I ran for office. And in that seat, the local seats are by and large nonpartisan seats. And so that actually I felt was very helpful for me as well, knowing that this organization is a nonpartisan organization. And so when I sought its endorsement in the community, people could understand that I was still upholding our local belief that we want to have nonpartisan folks serving us at the local level. So I will say that, yes, that has been a key important part of the work that we do.
And I know, I ran for office. I was not elected, but even in the running, I've had women come and say that they were inspired by that effort. And I have no doubt with the number of women that have become either candidates or moved on to become elected at every level. It inspires other people to think about joining that elected contingency. And that's really quite exciting. What would you offer in the form of advice for those that might be sort of on the fence or contemplating running for office? What would you say to them?
I think it's really interesting that you say that, attending that event was something that sort of helped to trigger you to run for office. I think that actually happens frequently. In fact, this last luncheon. Right after I left the luncheon, I was going to have a meeting with a woman that we were talking to that needed to file for office the next day. Like we had to get her there, and we did, right? And now she's running for state representative. And I think the number one way to really help women get to their decision is simply to ask them to run. And we know research shows that like women need to be asked 7 times before they are really going to take it seriously. And I think the reason for that is, women are thinking through a lot of other life balance things, like what does it mean for the work I do? What does it mean if I'm raising children? What does it mean for my partner? What does it mean to become a public person? There are a lot of different considerations, I think, that women are making as they're moving into the process of like, I'm going to step into doing something that maybe I never thought I could do. And the other part of the ask is that it helps women understand that they have support from kind of multiple different places. So they may need someone like me to ask them, but they may also need somebody who is in their community to ask them, and they may need somebody in their family to ask them, and they may need somebody, one of their longtime best friends to like ask them, right? And I think that then helps a woman feel a lot more supported in stepping into something that is, frankly, it's scary to like say, I'm going to step up and be a public figure now and put my name out there and say I'm running for office.
Yeah, agreed. And I don't know if you know the stats around men, and hopefully we have some men listening to this podcast. And so I trust that women sort of need more nudging along that journey than what men do. Is that sort of the statistic that you're sharing?
I think that is true. I know that we have seen research from the Humphrey in the past year that really shows where women are running for office and like where we're seeing gender parity and where we are not. And currently the Twin Cities metro area and like the surrounding kind of suburbs and some of the urban cores across greater Minnesota, we're actually pretty close to gender parity when you like disaggregate that data. And also we are close to parity around women of color and Indigenous women when you disaggregate that data from like urban versus more rural. And we're not there yet, but we're close. But when you bring back in all of the rural areas of Minnesota, that really brings our whole statistic way down. And we're not doing as well in the rural areas, the rural parts of the state. And so we are a statewide organization, and I know that we're taking a very hard look at that in terms of how we engage in rural communities and help to get out and do recruitment, to talk to women about what does it mean to run for office and what supports do you need, and to be more responsive to what those supports are.
Earlier in the conversation, you shared that you have basically been involved in like elections and campaigns your entire life, and you sort of detailed your relationship with the lieutenant governor. Can you share a little bit? Like, were you sort of a civically engaged kid? Like, what sort of led you to be sort of interested in public policy and local politics?
Well, you and I have known each other for a long time as well, and I think this is like a fun question to answer. Well, first of all, I will say, as a citizen of Leech Lake, Band of Ojibwe, Leech Lake Nation, and an Anishinaabe person, I am probably one of the most legislated people that exists because like they're in Minnesota because of local law, state law, federal law, but we also have tribal, right? Like there's tribal law as well. And so it is almost impossible for Native people not to be political or not to have some understanding of the political world because we kind of, there's so much more that we actually have to pay attention to. And then additionally, I think our communities have experienced so much more disparity that in order to fight that disparity, like we have to engage in the political process. So at a young age, I was living in the Pine Mill Court housing projects in Virginia, Minnesota, which is also where I later served on the city council. And I was a part of starting a youth program there, like a summer youth program, which led me to move on to like working in an American Indian youth program. And a big part of these programs was civic engagement, where we brought kids to City Hall to see a city council meeting. For our Circling to Seventh Generation youth program, we brought kids to Washington, D.C. to lobby. We engaged them with a national Native youth network so that they could understand how to like link up with other Native youth across the country around issues that they cared about. And that is probably where I really got my start. It was more community based and like thinking through what are the issues that like our communities need, and how can we actually have an impact in the political process, and in talking with elected officials and organizing. I think later, I worked in the court system for 10 years as an advocate, which isn't political work, but it like really helped me kind of see and understand what families are dealing with, and it's kind of like the worst of the worst situations, like what is going on in these families, that there is a need for like a protection order. After 10 years of doing that for myself, I was like, I can't do this anymore. I've just seen too much. And I don't understand like why, like it's the other analogy about like who's putting the babies in the river. Like you have to get upstream. You have to find out how they're getting in the river in the first place, because we can't just be downstream pulling babies out all the time. Right. And so I think for me, that meant getting more politically engaged. And that's kind of when I made the decision to run for office myself, and then do more work to help elect women to public office. And I think for me, because I come from, my cultural background, it's kind of a, like I grew up knowing that women have power. Like I grew up knowing that culturally women are leaders in community, and that we have a role to play, and that there's a responsibility and there's an accountability in that. And that's not the same as like sort of larger American culture, right? Like that women are not seen as leaders or known to be leaders. And in fact, they're discouraged from doing that. So I think that for me personally, it's been that sort of juxtaposition between my cultural identity and values and knowledge versus the world that I live in, which is like Minnesota at large or United States at large.
Right. You touched on a couple of things. One of them was sort of the culture that you come from and the governance structure, which is really about early exposure. I'll sort of reduce it, if you'll allow me to, being early exposure. And I also wonder if you think that we're exposing our young people early enough to civic education and early exposure to what it means to sort of exercise your power in this democracy.
Well, I think we can do better always. And if you ask my kids, they would probably say I had enough exposure, but they were with me like, all the time through campaigns and community meetings and just all kinds of things. So I think it can be a little complicated. I know like when I was working with youth and when they were about to turn 18, I was like, and this was in the Circling to Seventh Generation youth program. They were about to turn 18. And so I was really actively working with them to get registered to vote, and like, and speaking to them about why that was important. And oftentimes, their parents would just say, we don't vote. We only vote in tribal elections. We don't vote in the American elections. And it took a lot of educating for me to be able to talk to the youth and say, I understand your parents may not do that, and you have a decision to make for yourself. And I will also talk to your parents about this, but like, it's powerful that you actually have the ability to vote in both places, because people fought for that right to vote. And so I do think in some ways there's just some educating and backing up to do to help people understand why civic engagement is important and like, and why it matters. because certainly I think there is apathy out there, and I just think there is more work to do for sure.
There is. With that, what would you say to folks that feel sort of disillusioned with the current state of democracy and feel that their voice doesn't matter in the larger political process?
I mean, I would really invite them to come and participate with us on a door knock, a phone bank, one of our fundraisers. I would invite them to an event that we have where we have elected officials right in front of you that you can talk to and ask questions to and hear from them. And I think to me, it is really more, I mean, again, I come from sort of an organizing background, but it is really more about that human connection and that human relationship. That is what people will get engaged. That's how people will get engaged in the political process. If they don't feel like they have an actual connection into like with their leaders or with people who are making decision, why would they vote? Right? Like, what difference would it make to them to vote for somebody that they don't have a connection or relationship with? And I think that it is kind of, it's two part, right? Because it's like on one hand, elected officials and candidates have to do the work to like reach out and engage their community members. And I think that the other side of it is individual people also have to say, I would like to know more, and how can I know more, and how can I have an influence here? And certainly there are many, times throughout history where people have changed the outcome of things quite dramatically by engaging. So there, I think, are multiple ways to show that engagement, delivers results.
Yeah, it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If you don't vote and you don't speak on the issues that are important to you, in fact, don't have a voice. And then you feel like you don't have a voice because you didn't exercise it. And so I appreciate what you're saying, because when you have a more of a personal connection, which is hard to do in a season that we're in with a presidential election, but there are the down ballot opportunities, and you can certainly lean in there to see where people that are elected in your areas, where they line up with the issues. Really good advice. You talked about 7 generations, and it's one of the things that when I'm with my Native relatives, I think about a lot in terms of that for me. Can you talk about what that is culturally, 7 generations?
7 generations for us is really thinking about 7 generations, kind of, we're thinking into the future, but we're also like respecting what came before us. And so if, like, for me right now, if I'm thinking about 7 generations, I want to be understanding that 7 generations ahead of me will be impacted by the decisions that I'm making today. And so I carry that accountability and that responsibility to walk every day in a way that is going to be helpful for those future generations, so that they also will be able to walk in a good way. And so I think it's a way to help center, like, what are you contributing to the world right now, but also understanding that, like, we are connected to our future relatives, and we're also connected to our ancestors that came 7 generations before us. And for my people, like, we went through a lot of very traumatic and difficult things 7 generations ago and leading up to, like, today, right? And so when I think about all of the things that my ancestors had to survive to get to the point that I get to be here today, like, it is an incredible privilege for me. And I have to take that really seriously. And I have to understand what kind of a privilege that is. And not just to waste it, right? Not to just, say, well, it doesn't matter to be like working on issues that matter for our community. I would just want to go do something else, right? Like, and so I think being very rooted in those cultural values has been, for me, has been very helpful, because it helps to guide me, but it also, when things are really hard, it helps to ground me.
Were your parents involved in politics?
My dad was probably more of an organizer himself, I would say. I mean, I grew up with him being a part of the Ojibwe studies program at Masabi College. Like he kind of went back to college to learn more about the language and the culture. And the college made a decision to discontinue that program. And that's probably when I was in high school. And my dad really stepped up and helped to organize people in the community to speak to the college about the need for that program and the need to continue it and not just continue it. And I think about this because I have a picture of my dad like walking up to the college in the front, and he's got his red headband on and his hair is kind of blowing in the wind. And there's all these people walking behind him, and they went and had the conversation with the leadership at the college. But I think that's probably like the way that my dad was more engaged was more on that community level. And it was probably me and my sister who got him to be more politically engaged, like come vote with us, like make sure you're voting, like here's some education on the candidates we want you to be aware of. And I know I would say that the political engagement probably came more, honestly, the influence probably came more from my sister, my older sister who worked for Paul Wellstone. And then Paul Wellstone's impact then across our family was pretty big. Paul Wellstone was a person like no other. And it's unbelievable to me in many ways, the impact that he has had, not just on me, but many, many, many people I know. And I can remember being at work where I was working at a youth crisis shelter, and I was having a really hard day. And all of a sudden, somebody beeped down to my office and was like, Nevada, you have a call on line 1. And so I was just like, I don't even know what this is. I just don't even feel like taking a phone call right now. I picked up the phone, and it was Senator Wellstone, and he just said, hey, Nevada, it's me. It's Paul. And I'm like, what? And he's like, oh, Senator Wellstone. And I'm like, wait a second, what? And then he was like, yeah, I'm driving through, and I just wanted to call you. And I wanted to say, thank you for all the work that you're doing with kids, because it's really important. And it was just like, how is this happening right now? Mm-hmm. And I just think he did that for so many people. Yeah. And it's really hard to even understand how he did that.
Yeah.
There are multiple people I know that, and he would also ask me, when are you going to run for office? Right. Which is kind of like the full circle of what we were talking about earlier. It's like, you have to ask people to run. You have to show them that you believe in them. And, if you have somebody like a senator asking you to run for office, that's a pretty big endorsement, right? I'll say that, I know Melvin Carter was asked by him. I know that Lieutenant Governor Flanagan was asked by him. I know there's multiple other people that have been asked by him to run for office, and look what they're doing,
I know. His legacy is still unfolding. And, it is a testimony, right? There's a quote that I love that says, my life is the testimony. And, even as we're talking, I was thinking about, I think I was over at the Wellstone Center, which was the Wellstone Center. And I went through the run for office training or whatever it was. Oh. There used to be the thing
Wellstone Action?
Wellstone Action, where they had work on a campaign or be the candidate sort of tracks. And I was on the Be the Candidate track with Jeff Hayden, who then later became Senator Hayden, and the number of people that I met during that process. And it certainly opened up my eyes to not just what it means to be elected, but what it means to be for the people while being an elected. And I think that's a very different orientation. And I think you are communicating the important piece of what that means, which is staying in touch with the people and making sure that along that journey, you are doing the little things that add up to really big impact. And so thank you for going there with me. I can see the emotion there. And but I wanted to take a second because I think it's important to acknowledge the leaders who have impacted our lives.
Yeah. Well, Shonda, thank you too. I wasn't expecting to have this conversation today. I think like the other part of like Wellstone is that sadly when his plane crashed, it was in my community. And so like there's just and his like relationship to tribal nations was really unmatched, I think, and even maybe still, right? Like he just had a very like you said, a high acuity to like making sure that he was connecting with people and authentically connecting.
Mm-hmm. I also brought up your parents because, our communities, right? The Native community, the Black communities have had its time in America. It has done a number on us. And there is trauma associated with many things, including voting in democracy. And there are, people sitting in homes that have lived through some really trying times in our country, particularly in the South, that are the legacy of that can remember the idea of the loss of life, just with the attempt to vote. And the legacy of that continues in many ways. And so as we think about in families the many different ways that people approach voting, sometimes it's not really about vote, it's actually about the racial harm that happened. And I was asking that because sometimes the younger folks in the family have to sort of be the ambassadors of what's possible in the future, recognizing the complexity of the issue. And, I just think that sometimes it's important for the wider community to just pause and understand the history around voting in this country. Do you want to offer anything by way of educating around that issue?
Well, I mean, the founding of this country and the prosperity of this country could only happen because of stolen bodies and stolen land. Like we're here because of that. And Black and Indigenous people have experienced some of the most horrific things over the course of the development of the United States of America. And where we are today, you're right. Like there is a lot of trauma attached to that history and that we carry with us, right? And I think that as I was like talking earlier about, the parents of some of the youth that I had worked with, I talked to them, but I also understood that like if they didn't want to vote, like that they were coming from a place of like of trauma and the experience that they had or their parents had or their grandparents had, right? Like, and so like I always wanted to talk to them, but not shame them or blame them or push them in a way that was not like comfortable for them. So I do think that like, yes, like we do have to like make sure that we're thinking through like what that all means for people as we're talking about this political process and not adding additional harm or trauma onto people. And I know like throughout my career, we've done a lot of work. I've done a lot of work with a lot of people to engage, different communities, right? And what we hear from communities, like whether it's the Hmong community or the Somali community or the Native community or the Black community. It's like people don't want political folks dropping in and dropping out. Like they want to have that long relationship, that real relationship. And I think that that's where, at least in my career, I've really worked hard to like help maintain relationships over time, not just for an election cycle, right? Like to build and develop relationships that are going to sustain beyond the 2 years or the 4 years of each cycle. I think
in the black church, it's like, here comes election season. Here they come into the church service, right? And it can be incredibly annoying. And at the same time, we can't let that annoyance deter us from being part of the process and getting our vote and our ballot counted.
Yeah, it's going to take a lot of transformation for us to get to a place where we don't experience that sort of extraction. Mm-hmm. And that we're actually in a transformation to where we have like really good relationships with our elected officials, and we're not there yet. And the system actually wasn't built by us. I'll speak from my Ojibwe perspective, like was not built by my people or for our people. And so operating within a system that is not something that feels comfortable to me is is challenging, but also like when you enter that system, you actually are doing something to actively like transform it. And I think we're going to see more and more of that as time moves forward with young people and with diverse communities.
Yeah. As we were talking about racial harm, maybe I said this on here before, but I keep adding layers to my own sort of understanding of my own triggers, right? Which with candidate Harris, this questioning of her identity, and that being the focal point of much conversation, even on social media, even within communities of color, was so triggering for me, Nevada. And I think part of it we just touched on, knowing that the system wasn't created for us, knowing the barriers for women and people of color moving through leadership, period, much less elected leadership, which she has a long history of. And thinking about all of the lives lost just to get to the place of voting, much less running for office. And, women leaders, right? Like the minimization where it's like, man, you got this long, excellent career, whether or not you land on the issues where she's at or not, that get reduced to, laugh, identity, and all of these other things that seem to not necessarily matter if you are really looking at the issue with a fair lens. It certainly matters in terms of representation. But I realize it's because of the racial harm. And I also realize the response is also because of racial harm, right?
Yeah, thanks for saying all that. I was going to ask you, like, what was it about it that kind of struck you and that was hard?
I think it's probably the personal stories. We have been friends for a long time. We've known each other a long time, and we've discussed our leadership journeys. And communities can be hard sometimes, right? Because you take on leadership, and there's a lot that's expected. And sometimes the littlest thing can be the thing that people will expect of you while you're carrying, a big stone up a hill on one thing, and then you're like, wait. The expectation over here, you didn't really quite anticipate. And this idea that she has to defend what she's done for Black community or what she's done in this way or that way when she's dedicated a life of service. And it feels like, assessing the candidates on the issues compared to what you think is where you stand on an issue. Where your community stands on an issue, and to your point, future generations, what they need on the issue. I just feel like it doesn't feel fair. And so I'm probably projecting some of the challenges that I have had. But, we saw the same thing with Hillary Clinton, where it's, lying Hillary. We're starting to see some of the same tropes with her. What does Hillary have on versus Obama? Or Obama couldn't talk about being the Black candidate and Hillary couldn't talk about being a woman. It's like all these things around identity and the things that you have to navigate carefully so that you can be effective in how it shows up in leadership. And this is true regardless of where you sit. And we're watching it play out day to day. So I'm sure that that's what it was. But it was disappointing at the very least. But certainly, I guess, understandable considering the history of this country.
Yeah. And I think you said it. I think you said it correctly. I mean, it does have to do with racial inequity. And I know, certainly in my life, I feel like I've experienced like a lateral oppression from other Native people, for instance, where I'm like, would the same judgment be placed upon somebody else? And that's a question, right? Like, and it's like, no, probably not. And so like understanding, at least from when I think from my own perspective, like I have to understand what is really happening here. Like I have to take like an extra like academic level or like rational thinking level to like process something that feels emotional and to say, oh, this is actually a part of our race issues and what has happened over time. And it is a lateral oppression. And so, then be able to like figure out what am I going to do with that, right? But yeah, it's very hard. I mean, I think Vice President Harris is seeking the highest office in the land, and it will be the first time ever that we have a woman in the White House, and she is a multi-racial, multi-ethnic person as well, right? And arguably one of the most qualified people ever to hold the office. And so it is like those standards like become higher and higher. And then the criticism, of course, is also higher and higher. So yeah, I mean, we still have a lot of work to do. That's why I said earlier, like one step at a time, and like let's make sure
I hear that, and we know that she is not a stranger to that level of critique, and that she has built the strength that it will require along the route, whatever route this ultimately ends in. As we wrap, Nevada, we have. We do have a federal election, but any closing comments on the importance of the down ballot elections and just maybe perhaps an invitation for people to either get engaged or stay engaged beyond this November?
Yeah, I mean, we have endorsed candidates across the state of Minnesota. If you're paying attention to the congressional district where Dr. Kelly Morrison is running, that district has places where the entire ballot will be women, which is a pretty historic moment in Minnesota to see the entire ballot, all pro-choice women. I would say that it is absolutely important to pay attention to your local races, like your city races, your county races. Everybody in the state house is up this year, and we have one senator that is also up for election, which because Dr. Kelly Morrison is running for Congress, her state Senate seat is now up for election as well. So I think it's just important for people to kind of know what is going to be on the ballot besides the presidential. Expect to have to vote for your state representative. And probably some local races. Second part of your question, anything to share about women winning? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think you answered it. I think, part of it is just, the energy is often here, and, the caucuses, the primary election, sometimes it is actually sort of disturbing to me, the people that we send forward with very few votes. And I just think the opportunity for us to stay engaged, because we are just really smart folks in the community and we know what we need. And it doesn't get translated unless we sort of keep the foot on the gas in terms of getting people that represent us into these elected seats.
Yep, that's absolutely right. And I think if anyone is interested in supporting pro-choice women, like please reach out to us at Women Winning. I mean, our website is womenwinning.org. And we have an action series now through the election where if you want to like door knock, maybe you've never done it before. It's a great place to come and door knock with us because we work with campaigns who set up everything for it. And we're there to also help support those events. And of course, we have an event coming up, like I mentioned earlier, October 10th is our Men and Allies event, and that's at Bajos Brew Lab in Northeast Minneapolis. And it's a free event, so anybody can come, hang out with us, hear from the folks who are supporting pro-choice women, either as standing by them or working with them. And then also just please make sure you're registered to vote and vote in November.
Awesome. Thank you, Nevada Littlewolf. Thank you for being part of this conversation. This is a reminder to the listeners that we are not endorsing any candidate, and Women Winning supports pro-choice women across party lines. And for more information, check out their website. And if you want to get engaged in an organization that will not judge you if if you haven't been engaged before, it is a safe place to get on the phone and door knock. And it's actually quite fun. So anyway, thank you again, Nevada.
Yeah, Miigwech, thank you.